to talk spoilers, my friend. And again, we kind of talked off screen. There's so much to dive into. I figure we just kind of have an open discussion about character motives, what worked with the characters, some of the biggest moments that you found to be just absolutely amazing, or maybe some moments that didn't work, and just having this discussion, man. So again, for all those that are still watching, we're talking spoilers, as you all can see on the screen now. So I'm gonna toss it to you first, Yutaka. When we get introduced to these characters, we meet Danny in line taking some hibachi grills back, because as we find out in this premiere episode, he's want to take his life. He wants to take his own life because life just keeps coming at him. He just doesn't have the answers. But then we get our first, which Netflix released this opening scene, but even still watching it, I just love just the tension, the absurdity. And I think, to be fair, I think we've all had an experience with road rage. I don't know if it's been to this extent with Amy and Danny, but I've been in some incidences where I'm like, someone either cuts in front of you or don't have their signal light on or just does something stupid, and you just have that thought in the back of your head. You talk to me like, I'm gonna follow them, just see where they go, and not do anything, but just tell them how I really feel. So I think we can all relate to road rage. Do you have a story, you talk? Because I know you're a horror fan like me. Do you have any skeletons in your closet, my friend, about road rage?
I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't go about the whole like following because it gets intense. Like
Yeah,
that
you
was a
never know.
funny
Yeah,
sequence.
yeah.
But I will admit to obviously like you might speed up on somebody
Right, give them that
or
look, flick them off,
yeah,
honk
like
at them.
that's fine. Well, that's really not fine because that could be dangerous. But the chase that ensues
Yes.
is something else. And then
Yeah.
also, man, I can't say I would have in my head the idea of like just tossing trash out at the car behind me. Absolutely not. I'm just like, whoa, that to
And
me,
they're
that's a
going like
bit
80,
much.
90 miles per hour in this suburb. So like they're both like, they don't even care who's around them, what's around. They both just have so much rage. They just see red. But as we get our opening sequence, we're then kind of introduced to, again, we kind of talked about in the non-spoiler portion. We meet Danny or his brother Paul, who's living with him rent-free, kind of just living a life online. We meet George, who, again, you kind of get the impression that he seems to be a good husband. He's a very present husband, but he doesn't really understand Amy's aggression because, as we talked about, he comes from a different lifestyle. He comes from money. He looks at life as like that glass half full versus half empty approach. So you get the sense. I don't know, how did you feel about when you first met George? Do you think he was like an asshole of a husband, non-present husband? Like, what impression did you get? I guess you can also say with Paul, what impressions did you get from both of these characters? Because they are important characters to both Amy and Danny.
Well, with Paul, I will say he became such a better character in the end because in the beginning, I think he's a deadbeat.
Right, just a lazy,
And,
yeah.
also he just kind of has no drive in life, really. Like you
Right.
said, wants to get rich quick, not actually have to work,
Yep.
which is the opposite of his brother. But then with George, though, it's I don't think I just think he's out of touch. That's really what it is. I think he tries to be present and he tries to be a loving husband, but he's so out of touch that he just doesn't see the
The
signs, in
signs,
my
exactly.
opinion. And so like, and that's why I hate to say like he's an idiot, but he comes across maybe goofish in a sense.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
again, yeah, I'd rather, if I had to say though, I just it does anger me when like I'm like, oh, you're given everything, but you can't even see this. Like I would love to know how truly that they became a couple, because that I'm like, I don't get that at all.
Yeah, I would imagine they met at some high-end art gallery, and
Yeah.
Amy saw, well, no, I'm sorry. They actually, I think they do address. I think they met in college, but they don't explain who talked to who first. I just know that Amy said that she was like so interested in him because he seemed to, obviously he's probably more happy and probably, again, sees the half of the glass half full versus, we know Amy's very, dark and kind of has a lot of dark thoughts and depression. So she probably saw like, you know what, I'm gonna take his sunshine. I'm gonna or not take it, but I'm gonna surround myself around him to maybe it'll bleed into my life. I can just, it seems like their marriage is pretty much not a facade, but it seems like she has been appeasing his happiness more so than like living in reality. Because I definitely agree with you. I would say George has lived a sheltered life. And also as we find with Fumi, his mom and his dad probably lived a very fake life. She was
Yes.
very accepting of, whatever came, and we'll talk about it later, where she didn't tell him about Amy having an affair because she probably thought her husband had affairs, and she kept her mouth shut because money was coming in, art, all this stuff. Perception, as Fumi says, is all about perception. So I think George, maybe not necessarily like stupid, very cartoonish at times, but I think he just lived a very sheltered life where it kind of unfortunately didn't prepare him for real world situations and relationships.
No, and I loved Fumi because uh, she
She
was
was
also the
great.
type to where she's like she didn't want the money train to run out for her, you
Exactly.
know,
Exactly. Because we
and
find out later she was trying to get a loan from Amy, but she just never knew how to approach the situation until it worked to her advantage. Oh, I got some dirt on you, and the
mhm.
chair being sold and all that stuff. But yeah.
Like, that was the other thing, which is a key thing in just, relationships in this show, communication.
Oh my
W
god.
Oh gosh, it was either
Taka, this show
miscommunication
would have
or
been
lack
ended. It would have
thereof.
ended in the first episode if people would have just had a conversation. If Danny and Amy would have had a conversation like they had at the finale, we would have had no series. Because they have a
True.
lot more in common, as we find out later. They have a lot more in common than they do in their differences. But yeah, I totally agree with you. If people would have spoken in this show, a lot of things would have been resolved.
I'm curious now thinking that of this too, uh, who had the most devious thing that they kinda did to the other
Oh
person?
my gosh, that is such a good question. I almost, and even though I picked Danny as my favorite character, I almost say with him doing that thing to Paul, with like taking his like future away with the college applications, that was pretty dark. Because as we find out with that flashback episode, that he always like he just wanted Paul to be around. Oh, I'll stay home with school. I'll watch Paul, and so he always that to me was pretty effed up. But then you look at Amy, and it's like the cheating. And then for that second, and we'll talk about it. The show did such a good job of making me think that number one, I thought people were going to die left and right. Like I thought Fumi was going to die when she fell down those stairs. I thought Paul died when he banged his head against the wall. In my sick, twisted mind, I thought when Paul, or not Paul, but George and Danny were fighting over that gun, I thought that Junie was gonna like walk up somewhere and they were gonna shoot her. Like this is where my
I
head goes.
was nervous on that one.
The show is
Yes.
very stressful. I was on the edge of my seat. But yeah, man, I don't know. That's a good question. Who do you think was the most devious in all the different schemes and also
I
too
am
Danny with the church? I don't. Maybe now the more I talk about, I think
Oh,
Danny was
I
pretty deep.
think, well, that, the church the pastor, like, he was a
Oh,
whole
the
'nother
Edwin
character
character.
too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I would stop to say Danny what he did to his brother because that was
It's taking
it
someone's
was
future, or
he
at
was
least
so
their hopes.
selfish
Yeah.
because like, he wanted him to always be around,
Yep.
and I was just like, "Y he wanted to, like, better himself and
Yep.
was going to, and
Yep. And
oh,
who's to
that
say that if
crushed
Paul would have
me.
went to school, he maybe would have got a good job, that home you want to buy your family could have happened through Paul, but Danny just wanted to be the man.
Oh my god,
Wanted to be the man.
that was something else. Like,
That
I was just
was.
like
That was
because
pretty dark.
that's what crushed then Paul, like,
Mhm.
never thinking he was good enough, and
Yep.
he's like, "Well, F it."
Yep. It's a great point. So I think, are we in agreement? And everyone too in the chat, let us know answers to answer Yutaka's question. Who do you think was the most devious of the two? I think we're leaning towards Paul or Danny being the worst. And then he also did the whole thing with befriending George. But I will give Amy this.
Oh, yes.
The relationship between Amy and Paul was pretty. It started off as just like, let me have what his younger. Well, she didn't even know at first. She thought she was actually talking to Danny until she sent that picture of himself. But that was pretty messed up, man. Sleeping with him and leading him on. I
The
think it's safe to say she did
catfishing,
care. She cared for Paul. Would you say she didn't love him,
uh,
but I think
I
she
think
cared
she
for him.
appreciated the connection, but I don't think
Right.
she had any true, like,
True feelings
actual emotion.
like George did with what's her name, Mia. Their
Yeah.
entanglement. Which, by the way, you talking? Do you think that he didn't have any physical relationships with Mia? Do you think it was, as he says, just a conversation of love, spirits, whatever he called it? Do you think they didn't get physical?
Yes, I kind of do think that was him because that seemed like his entire
Something he would do.
character. Because he felt like, I mean, he was still having an emotional relationship,
Yeah, yeah,
but he's still like, he clearly didn't seem like the type of guy who would also seal the deal.
right. I mean, he did, he did pleasure himself to a picture of Mia, which, by the way, that scene when he accidentally sent Amy the screenshot of the there's so many moments, man. We could be here for hours. There's just so many moments to show. But I guess pivoting back to that first episode, because I think the episode one, as you talked about, was the episode that, and I when I saw the first episode, I immediately tweeted, "This show is excellent. I can't wait to see what happens next." Because I think episode one just has that moment, the build up is just the setup and the tension of, we see their lives. We see that Danny eventually finds her address. He goes to her address. We also have this fetish that I'm very curious on why they didn't really explain the fetish too much with the whole gun, with the Amy gun thing, because to my knowledge, George didn't know that she was like getting off to the gun, because he hid the gun, but we don't know why he hid the gun. Because he says, "Oh, you know why I hid the gun," but they never explain why, because he obviously didn't know that that's what she did with it. So it almost made me think, was she like, I don't know, thinking about contemplating taking her life at some point? Did you ever get an impression of what initially why George hid the gun from her? Because he didn't know that that was something that she did. She had a kink with the gun situation.
Well, yeah, the kink thing was odd, and my only other thought was maybe George had has seen her rage come up and
Mm,
just
just to be
was
on the
not
safe side.
sure
Yeah.
if she would just, jump like from a one, well, like she does, a one
Yeah.
to a 10,
Yeah.
but it's fine if go ahead and do that as long as you're
Yeah.
not holding a gun, kind of
Right.
thing.
Especially with, Junie in the house and all that stuff.
Exactly. So that was my only thought because it was very like it was funny, but I'm just like, what?
It's a
That's how
weird
I'm like,
kink.
this girl's got some
She has
issues.
some other weird kinks too, with that old man, with the cover in her face and the whatever. By the way, what was that witch thing like that? I immediately thought of Insidious, the woman with the pale face or whatever. I was like, what? Because I know when she was younger, she read some book or magazine, and the figure was in there, but they really didn't explore like what was that? Was that like a mythical figure, like a
I
boogeyman
need
figure
to
within her
research that
culture?
some
So I wasn't
more
really too
because
sure what that was.
I do think that was more like it felt like shame
Right. The
because
manifestation
like
coming.
she
Yeah.
was just also the fact that she hid herself and then when she would
Mm,
look up,
mm.
oh, but yes, I wish we could have went into that a little bit more because
Yeah.
I'll be honest, like without doing my own, like, oh, maybe I should really look what their intention was.
Yeah.
My first thought was just shame
Yeah,
because,
I think you're right. Honestly, now the more you say it, yeah, I think that was just like a manifestation of that, which we'll talk about later. Because again, it's generational. Her parents, her dad cheated on her mom. The mom knew about it, didn't do anything about it, stayed happy. So it's the
well,
parent.
happy.
Right.
Like
Right.
I again, yes, I just you see these things passed
Down
or
from,
like,
yeah.
just passed down and
Yeah. I agree. I agree. But again, I guess the thing with episode one that just hooked me was the pettiness level, Yutaka. He finds her address, which by it is kind of, I guess it is kind of scary. The fact that you can just literally get someone's license plate, pay $80, and you can find out where to live. That's a pretty scary world we kind of live in,
yeah.
to easily find people. But he finds her. He pretends to, well, he doesn't pretend. He is a handyman, but he kind of pretends to be like, oh, your roof is, whatever, is wasting money. And he goes in the house, which, by the way, Amy, why are you letting strangers in? You don't let a stranger into your house, no matter how friendly or nice they were. But she lets him in. He says he needs to go to the restroom, which, by the way, before they reveal that again, I didn't know where the show was going, how dark it was going to go. I'm like, wait, is he about to like hurt her, kill her, do something really bad? Luckily, he's not that evil. He goes to the restroom, we talk, and pees all over her bathroom floor. And that's the beginning of, as the show is called, beef. As he runs away, she gets his license plate. And then we go down this path of just lies, deception, and just craziness, man. Again, was there any thoughts about that first episode that just had you like, this show seems to be amazing?
I mean, well, one, I think when we do also like it just feels like it's also like that poor Danny in a sense, like, yeah, it's, how his life was starting out in a sense with that.
Yeah.
And then to go through that entire, like, he wants to return all these and he can't even do that because he doesn't
And
have
follow
the
through with it.
receipt. I
Yeah.
was just like, oh my God. I was like, that, yay. Um, but also, yeah, same thing. Like the way it just progresses, my anxiety to see how it
Oh
was
my
going to have
goodness.
just like that
Through
entire
the roof.
episode. Like what's going to happen to Amy, but also same thing. When they're tearing through this neighborhood, are they going to end up hurting other people?
They didn't care.
And yeah, it was just
Yeah.
very fascinating. And
Yeah.
I like you said, I loved the build up.
Oh
That
my goodness.
that was
So well done.
so
So
it
well
just
done. It ends in a way,
um
like you mentioned earlier, that you like, I have to see what happens next, which, I mean, just to kind of bring it into other characters, I guess early on, this is when we're introduced to Jordan. So we find out that Amy wants to sell her plant business for $10 million, which she claims that she wants to retire because she wants to spend more time with her family. And I think we kind of alluded to it, but even if, which it does happen, she does sell her company, and we find out she's still not happy because
oh
she
yeah.
can't find that voice. She's always finding something. Okay, I'm gonna get pregnant, have Junie. That didn't work. Okay, I'm gonna have my own business. That didn't work. Okay, I'm gonna sell my business. That didn't work. So she's constantly seeking a way to fill that void. But we talked about it in the non-spoiler portion. But what did you think about, I guess, Jordan, the character Jordan, and also her sister-in-law Naomi turn an engagement? They engage each other by the closer in the series. What did you think about those characters and just in general the whole idea of what they brought to the series?
Jordan was fascinating because it I mean, and you could look at anybody in terms of if you
Yeah.
have so much money that uh, it makes me think of the most recent season of You, to where everybody who was very wealthy felt that they
Yeah.
could do or say whatever, and
Yep.
that's kind of what Jordan was.
Exactly.
And in this case, though, Jordan wanted to also, buy up all this culture, also speak ill, which thinking it was okay.
Exactly.
Like, but also everyone around her is like, did she just? Can she? It's okay.
It's
And
okay
I'm
because
like,
she's, yeah.
the hell? But
Yeah.
I'm like, that's sadly life, and I
Yeah.
think that's really well represented in her character because it was just very fascinating to me because also it was how she was just very comfortable with this man she's married to, and now she's like, he wasn't doing it. I'm gonna just go after this. I'm like, this is twisted. Meanwhile, like you said, she was searching for her own acceptance, so she's like,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. I'm like,
Yeah.
"Mm,
Jordan was and talk about when we talked about non-spoiler portion, her death was pretty gnarly. That being slammed by the vault doors and being Naomi, I guess, essentially killed her accidentally, but she, I don't know if she did it accidentally because it
Uh,
was kind of like, yeah,
well, I think it was, "Hey, I'm in the panic room and you're
right.
not keeping up, so I'm not gonna lie, I would do the same thing, I'm safe." I know that's terrible, but I knew that's exactly what she was thinking. She's like, "It's about me at this point,"
Very true.
because if
Very
it were
true.
the other way, I guarantee you
Oh,
Jordan would
she would have
yeah.
tripped her and like well, funny enough, now when I think about it, in episode 9, she said just take Naomi because she thought it was her brother
Yes!
that was doing the thing because they divorced each other. So she was willing to give Naomi up. So I guess Naomi was like, well, payback's a bitch. Um,
Exactly,
which I
and
guess we didn't really get a ton of Naomi in this show. I think episode 6 or 7, it was whenever we learned more about Fumi, they gave us a little bit of information, Naomi, that she seems to always want to seek approval.
yes.
She is always looking, she's Jordan's assistant. We never really saw the husband, but he didn't seem to always be home. She was all happy that she's going to be in the magazine. And then they had this really weird thing that they don't really explore, but she like zips herself up in her clothes bag and like she didn't suffocate herself, but it was just like a very weird thing to do. So I guess any impressions for you, Yutaka, about the
I
Naomi character?
laughed at that.
I'm like, what the hell is she doing?
I thought that was a way for her to, and this might be really reaching, but one, it felt like a weighted blanket or just a
Mm,
coping mechanism, but also the fact that it was a designer bag that she was like, or
right.
like that held designer clothing. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, this seems like that'd be her. But then she also, again, as you said, for the whole approval, when she's like, I'm gonna solve this mystery.
Yeah.
That it I mean, to I think everybody else are like, we don't really care.
Right.
Uh,
And
but
she's a great representation of people that just have too much time on their hands.
yep,
She's
absolutely.
seeking approval. She's looking for some purpose in life, and her thing was, I'm gun ho on trying to figure out. Well, she was, and also too, she was jealous of Amy because of the success she had,
Yes.
and she was getting all of Jordan's attention. Um, I was hoping that beef between Naomi and Amy was expanded upon just like a couple more episodes, because it literally solves itself within the same episode, where Naomi approaches Amy and Amy's like, "You think I'm having an affair with Danny?" And then ultimately Fumi takes the fall because again she wants her son to be happy, and perception is a big thing. But I wish Naomi, because I thought that actress was great. I wish she would have had a little bit more to do, because I thought she was great. And there was a little bit more her plot that seemed just to be very interesting to me, that I wish they would explore just a little bit more.
I mean, that would have been great if she would have
Yeah.
ended up having like a real like beef as well with somebody. I
Season
would
2.
have enjoyed that. Um, oh, now that I'm thinking about it too, speaking of Fumi, the fact that oh, she got drugged, that Amy drugged her, that was the other thing that I was just like, okay, that
Oh, when
almost
she
tipped
got
the
back from the
scales.
hospital.
So because Amy didn't wanna Amy's like, "Oh, she knows."
She
I was
knows,
just like,
yeah.
"Dang."
Yeah, because she was yeah, because when she got back, which by the way, like I said, this show, I thought it was gonna it was dark, but I thought it was gonna go even darker when the whole Michael and Bobby, which were the associates of Isaac, when they take Danny's idea, who, and again, Danny, they have moments of redemption. He wasn't going to go through with his plan to kind of get at Amy and rob their art, because he talked to George, and George, he's like, man, this guy has this pretty sad life. He's living in the shadow of his dad. So he's like calling it off. But then they come through and do the failed robbery. But when she fell down those stairs, I'm like, oh my. I mean, and in the way, again, the way the show does it, it ends it perfectly, because you don't know if she's alive. Excuse me, alive or dead. But I was like, oh, did they just kill Fumi? Because if that would have happened, this show would have, it would have even got darker, because I don't even know what Amy would have done if that would have been the case, or even Georgia, that matter. But no, Fumi was, I had so much fun with her. She was such a fun character. Always just trying to keep up with the Joneses, and she's a perfect manifestation of someone that literally holds in so much and just wants to be in with the bumping elbows and perception was her thing. So she was a fun character for sure. So,
I speaking of, the failed robbery actually, yeah, Danny wanting to call that off. That's what
mhm.
I was like, "Oh, you got a redeeming quality." I was like, "Okay,
Yeah.
alright, you're about to, like, calm down," and well, then those jokesters come in and still do that, and that was
Yeah.
also still quite hilarious, but I was
Yes,
just like,
those 2 characters. I think they're both comedians, and
mhm.
they played it really well, doofuses. Um, but I'm thinking back to Danny and just this decisions that he made, going back to just how dark and twisted they both were. There was a point in the season where he almost blows up Amy's car, but then Junie's in the car, which is so funny when Junie like meets him officially, like, I know you, and George is like, stop being weird. But Junie, she got herself in some trouble when she went into Danny's car later in the season. But yeah, Danny, man, he some dark stuff. He was willing to blow up a woman's car just because of that beef. It's like, Jesus, they're going to the
That
extreme, man.
that was the other I did like this. It starts out where they have that road rage incident,
Mhm.
and I do love when they meet back up to where they're like, "We need to call it off. We're both getting in too deep."
That
And
was great.
that guy honks at them, and they
And they
both
have their
like,
moment. Yeah,
I was like, "That's funny."
it
That
is.
is I appreciated
That
that.
was a fantastic moment, man. And I guess leading up to that, I guess this kind of leads us into, there were moments in the show where Danny did want to call it off, but that's when his cousin Isaac comes into play. Isaac was not my favorite character, because again, I thought Danny and Amy stole the show, but he was one of those characters where you talk about a wild card. Didn't know what he was going to do. He teetered that line of being kind of goofy-ish and slapstick comedy, but then he could hit that switch when he got angry, you believe that he might do some dark things, which he ends up doing in episode 9. What were your impressions of the Isaac character? who is the cousin of Danny and almost the reverse of the Danny and Paul relationship, where, you know, he has the relationship dynamic where he, you know, Paul kind of looks, or Danny, I wouldn't say looks up to him, but he kind of respects him in a sense, and also takes orders from him, very much how Paul does to him. But in general, what did you think about the way Isaac played into the series?
I think Isaac also felt bad though, which is why like he felt bad for the whole, Danny and Paul's situation and like the
Yeah,
parents moving back
right, because he was
because
responsible for the hotel
yeah,
getting
and so
seized.
I also I mean his character was just very over the top at times.
Yeah.
And also, he would seize an opportunity. He didn't
Oh yeah.
seem like he would be dangerous, but then because
Those are
he
the worst
takes the
ones.
rap,
Hmm.
and I just, I mean, he also has great ideas, which Danny steals.
Yeah.
And he's like, "You took my money, you took
The
my
rice
ideas." He's like,
cookers.
"I'm gonna."
Kelly Clarkson. He was so damn funny. Isaac was
I
amazing.
I was dying.
Yeah.
That was really good. I liked he just was two opposites. Like you could really love him, but
Mhm.
I don't feel like he would cross you if you didn't like I mean, had Danny not touched his money, he would have been like, "You do what you need to do." But
Yeah.
the second he's like, "You put my life in jeopardy,"
Hmm.
he's like,
He snitched on him too. He threw him under the bus, you know, and
"Put him in jail." And
put him in jail. And not that I felt bad for Isaac, but there is, to your point, there was a moment where him and Danny were hanging out a little bit more because Danny and Paul get into a bit of a fight with the whole Kayla situation. And he was, you know, Isaac kind of looked at Danny as like he wished that he was his brother. He wished that Danny and him were brothers and not cousins, because he even like he didn't like Paul. He even mentioned, "Oh, Paul used to poke fun of you when you guys were kids and this, that, and the other. And you remember when we used to hang out and we did this." So he was seeking it again. The show does such an excellent job of having all these characters. They're all seeking love. At the end of the day, they just want a hug. They just want someone to talk to, confine in.
mhm.
And unfortunately, when Isaac didn't get that, he did shady things. You know, was a counterfeit formula that ended up getting the hotel closed, the rice cooker scheme, the battery scheme. I mean, the man had a scheme for everything: the chairs, the massage chairs, stealing the equipment for the construction work, which ultimately leads us into one of the more surprising plots, the church situation. Danny goes to church, has a mental breakdown, lets it all out. We find out that his ex girlfriend or ex hookup mate, Victoria, I think was her name was, who's the wife of Edwin. What did you think about just that whole scenario with the church, Edwin, Victoria, the basketball tournament, which ends up having Edwin lose his praise singing duties?
I loved that. That basketball sequence was hysterical
Oh my
because
goodness.
here I am thinking, okay, I was like, there's got to be something. And then when he say again, as you said, everybody has that moment where they let the best get, or they let it get the best of them, their
Exactly.
anger, their
Yep.
rage.
Hmm.
And I was just like, oh, that's funny. So, uh, I mean, he was he was such he felt like because of the position he was in, he had this respect. But again,
Hmm.
same thing like with Boomy, it's all about perception, and that's
Yep.
what his
Yep.
was,
Hmm.
even though his life wasn't perfect.
Yeah.
And oh man, yeah,
Everyone was a good kid. I don't know if you watch Umbrella Academy.
I didn't realize that was him. It
That
took me a
was
second. I was like,
what is his name in the show? Because
he
he's
was
because I know he
Ben.
died.
Was it Ben? The
Ben,
one
yeah,
with
you're
the
right.
like
It is
the
Ben with the octopus arms. Yeah,
yeah. I was like,
yeah,
he looks familiar, but I
yep,
didn't realize it was him because again, his obviously I think his mannerisms, but also what
yeah,
he's typically outfitted in Umbrella versus this. I was just like,
yeah.
oh,
I like
that's
him
the
as an
same
actor.
guy.
He's a really good actor. And I even well, I didn't feel bad for him, if I'm being honest, but I did feel like for the fact that his wife and the mother of his child never gave up on Danny. She was always, I think he even admits to Danny after Danny thinks, and we'll talk about that moment when the house burns down, but Danny was under the impression that Edwin was the one that did it. come to find out he was just pranking Danny. But he says that, you know, he's jealous because his wife hasn't forgotten Danny, and I think she said that you were the best she's ever had. So Edwin was an interesting character. Again, as you mentioned, someone that had power, but then still had their demons and had their insecurities that came out, erupted during a church pickup game of all sorts. Like, what are you guys playing for communion and for, you know, what's on the line? You know, first in line to the pearly gates. Like he just let it out, right? So again, this every single character in the show. I can't even think who was the happiest character. I guess Bobby and Michael. They were the only ones that who just was so buffoons. They didn't really have that many emotions. But
And
all these
they had
characters,
a
man, were good.
gruesome fate too, so
Yeah,
which
they
is
did.
interesting because honestly, I think the people who were the happiest were the ones who they actually died.
Very true, man. But the church thing was bananas, man. How they schemed to that, and he took the whole purpose of the church was he couldn't the way he was making his money. It was going to take, I think he called the lenders. It's going to be like 7-8 years before you can even be considered for a loan. So he
Mhm.
took the shortcut route, and the church. I think the church came about because him and Paul were going to work together. He said, Paul, I'm going to let you be more in the business. And he said, oh, why don't we work with people in the OC? And yeah, that's how the church plot came about. But outside of that, man, talk about the relationship between Paul and Miss Amy and how all that came to be. Did you think that it was going to lead down the path of them going to Vegas together? She kept her distance, even though it wasn't cheating, but it's still just the fact that you're having a man in your room, to ultimately them hooking up, them breaking up, she being Kayla, just that whole plot, Yutaka. What did you think about the whole Amy and Paul relationship?
It was bizarre but satisfying. I mean, I don't even know where to start, and I didn't think she would catfish somebody.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, I gotta give it to Paul though. He was kind of starting to become happy, and then when he's like, "Wait, this is the woman who's effing you over," and like he locks down ranks, he becomes loyal to his brother. Like
Yeah.
I was just like, "That's very interesting,"
Yeah.
but it's family, and
Hmm.
I didn't see where that was going, and it just went it went bonkers, and obviously her sending, like, the photos,
Yeah.
I was just like, "This is too much," which Danny they did I mean, they did not seem where like, I felt Danny had to have had a phone or his own computer that he had to go steal his brother's phone to look at a pixelated photo. I'm like, "What is this?"
I mean, not to derail the more thoughts on what you think about Paul and Amy, but did you think there was any attraction between Danny and Amy throughout the show, like secretly? Because obviously he's pleasuring himself to her picture, but then it was also a moment where I think Amy, she says, when George, are you obsessed with him? I don't know. And then even the first episode when she invites Danny in and he says, "Is your husband home?" She says, "No." Like, I don't. Did you think there was any romantic feelings between the two besides them sharing a interest and rage? Any romance
I
between these two?
think Amy likes a sense of danger though, too.
Yeah.
Maybe that could come into the gunplay, which is why she was okay with letting a random man walk into her very, like, impressive house
Yeah.
to like, you would think that if there was something wrong, like, it's not just gonna be some guy, like, I did not I was like, that part, I was like, "I don't believe that."
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't. But I'm like, I think she was again, she was just happy someone was talking to her, I guess.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like there could have been some, but I think I don't know. Yeah, I wouldn't think there was the
Full on attraction, wanting to be
yeah.
together. Yeah. No, I
I don't
agree. I
even
just
think
think
she
there
was
was
attracted to her husband, to be honest. I think
yeah,
she
I
was
think it
attracted to Paul, but
yeah. Yeah, I think that she would have liked the sexual which I think at the end of the day it was more sexual with Paul than anything. I don't think she had that of a emotional um
no.
um high level, intellectual relationship. It was more sexual for her versus the other way with Paul. It was just kind of like, oh man, a girl, a mother, a rich woman likes me. So, but yeah, now that whole Paul Kayla situation really shook out so weird to me. Not weird, but really interested to me with him. Him being catfish, and when he does find out that it's not Kayla, and he obviously didn't know at that point when she told who he was, but he still ended up liking her, and she just kept letting it go on and on and on. And you mentioned earlier, Danny, man, what the he even says later in the season, like, I should have paid more attention to him or talked to him about real shit. Like, dude, how did you not find that out? Because it seemed like they were dating for a couple
Quite some
months.
time.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
like they were hanging out and doing all like you mentioned, she's sending him pictures. So yeah, but yeah, man, Danny was just oblivious to that whole relationship. Crazy.
I mean, well, Danny was so focused on, making all this money
Hmm.
to build this house on
Hmm.
this land to bring his parents. I think he had tunnel vision, and he wasn't
Yeah.
looking aside from the ongoing beef. That was all he cared about.
Hmm.
He didn't
I
care about the
agree.
destruction in the process, but also he didn't care about cutting corners.
Yeah.
Like that house
Yeah.
situation.
Wow, the wiring, all due to him, which we'll get into. But I do want to mention, because all their standoffs are so great between Amy and Danny. The second standoff they have officially seen each other again is when she goes to Vegas, new haircut, which I don't know if I like the haircut. The haircut was kind of throwing me off, but they go to Vegas, and she's doing a speech with Jordan. She ultimately does sell her company, and she's willing to work again because, again, she's like, okay, I need to fill this void. I'm going to continue to work for 5 more years. But then Danny and Isaac find her during the conference, and Danny says all the stuff over the microphone, and that's where Naomi kind of puts the pieces to the puzzle, and she's trying to do her Sherlock Holmes thing. Um, but I was very surprised that Danny did not, because they end up getting arrested, but obviously they chose to go with Isaac, pull it in all on Isaac. And really, I was surprised how easy Danny was able to get away with, because we see from, I think that was episode 4 or 5 when they get arrested. In the next episode, Isaac's on house arrest, and then Danny's just kind of free to go. But when that happened, man, what did you think about it when Danny called her out on all the stuff and in front of her friends and Jordan at that conference? Did you think things were going to escalate to that?
I thought they were I thought that was gonna go. I thought that was. I felt like that was to me. I'm like, not knowing that it was 10 episodes. I just kept hitting play. I was
Yeah.
like, this could be like where it's all gonna
It's the
explode,
fan. Yeah.
and it kind of does, but not to how it is. And so I was just like,
Yeah.
I was just sitting there like I was eating my popcorn. I'm like, oh, how, like, keep
Calling
going.
her.
I want to see this play out.
Yeah.
And yeah, and again, Isaac's not a good person at the end of the day, but I
Not at
did
all.
feel, I was like, oh, poor Isaac. He really got hung out to dry on that one.
And I think the beauty of that, I think it was the mid-season point, because it's episode 5, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was the same episode in which Isaac and Danny started to do the church plan. And you
Hmm.
talk about karma, he ends up getting arrested for that at the end of the episode. So again, there's the way this show did, each episode was almost a solo bottle, not a bottle episode, but it almost felt like each episode was a full appetizer, meal, and dessert. Like these were, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on this. Even though they were 35, I think the longest episode was like 37 minutes. They felt so full. Like I can't think of a show besides, like, maybe, I don't know if you ever watched Donald Glover's Atlanta. Um, but every time I watch like a 30-minute episode show, or week by week 30-minute show, it almost feels like it's just so much still left on the table. But they just were able to make it seem like each episode had a beginning, middle, and end. Of course, it sets up for more things, but I just felt like everything was just so fulfilled throughout this, the way that they broke things into these episodes.
And I think that just goes to the writing.
Yeah.
That's like, I mean, a really great beginning, middle, and end each episode. Yeah, I completely agree. And it was kind of nice because at first I'm thinking half-hour show. And even after the first episode, I was like, wow, that was really good. But
Yeah.
I was like, are we going to go to like a sitcom format to where you're not going to have things resolved, or it's really just
Right.
about this like minor plot that might tie in to everything
Mhm.
at the end, but not. But yeah, each episode you got hit with some heavy things.
Yeah.
They were some or most were resolved, but it would still give you that cliffhanger to bring you to the next one. And I liked that.
I thought it was just so great. Again, I felt full after each episode, but my greedy ass just had to go back and get seconds and thirds and fourths. I just had to keep going, man, because that's how good the show was. But I guess pivoting over to one of the biggest, kind of pivoting to the second half of the show where things are de-escalated as they do meet up. You talked about the scene when they met up at the parking lot, but Amy calls him there because she wants him to take $25,000, I think it was, to take the fall. He considers it because we know he's broke for money. But then Fumi comes in and says that it was her in the SUV and not Amy. So now Naomi is kind of backing off Amy. Danny finds this out, but then this is where Danny comes into like, well, maybe I should go ahead and throw Isaac on the bus, which he does, and we see that. So then we get this huge 8-month gap, Yutaka, and things are going well. Amy sells her business. She buys a vacation home. Her and George, even though they had their issues with him with the Mia, he finds out. Well, he doesn't find out about the relationship between Paul yet, but things are going well. Danny and the business is going well. The mom and dad are coming home. Things are looking up, my friend. But then, of course, hits the fan.
Oh my God, yeah.
I think it all goes down. I think it was episode 7 where it all kind of goes down 8 months later. I think it hits the fan after George admits to Amy what happened. They're living good. And then I'm trying to remember what sets off the chains of events again. Do you remember how it all plays out by chance? I know Edwin. Okay. I think I remember.
That's when so house burns down due to the wiring, but he thinks it's Edwin.
Yeah.
Edwin's like, no, just wanted to prank
He was
you.
just pranking him, yeah.
So then
I'm trying to remember why Amy got back into the mix. Oh, Danny goes to the party because George invites him because he's going under the name Zane. He sees the tattoo on her back and he's like, wow, you are really twisted. You've been sleeping with my brother. And she tells him, or Danny makes it up and says that she said that Paul was some child baby. So when Paul heard that, he goes to talk to George and say, hey, I slept with your wife. George takes Junie. Then we're left to under the think that Amy went to the house and burnt it down, but we end up finding out that it was Paul or Danny, terrible wiring. I guess he isn't that good of a contractor like he thinks he is. So a lot thrown out there, but just your whole general impressions of how all that shaped up. Before we go to episode 8, did you think Amy went that dark to have burnt down the house? Because it sets it up perfectly. Because we see her in a car crying, and she like puts on this serious face, and
like she's getting ready to lose so much. Like
she doesn't have anything.
I feel like she's like, I've got nothing left to lose. If I'm going down, taking you with me. And I apologize. My dog's having a fit out there.
Oh, you're good. You're good.
But yeah, I feel like I thought, I'm like, I honestly was like, yeah, I think she did it.
She did. I'm totally with you.
And I mean, when you find out it wasn't her, I'm like, Danny. Oh, all right.
And then to take it to the next level, Danny, I thought he was just going to take the fall, take responsibility, but then he, as the whole series building up to, he just lies again to his younger brother, because Paul is the one under the assumption that it was Amy. Then we see Danny comes up with this idea that he's going to plant gloves in her house, that she did it. He ends up meeting with George, but at this point in the episode, I think it was episode 8, George knows about everything because Amy tells him, slept with Paul. The guy, your friend Zane, is really Danny, so he knows everything at this point, but he's afraid of Danny when he comes over to the house and they get into the whole scuffle. And again, my dark mind, I thought that he died when he hit his head against that wall there. But yeah, man, the way that whole fire thing played out, the parents go back home. At that point in the show, who did you feel worse for at that point? Was it Amy losing George, Junie, her family, or was it, building up to Danny doing all this stuff to have that house burned down? Who, at this point in the season, who were you feeling worse for?
Well, like, I think Amy still, I don't think she cared about, well, I don't want to say she didn't care about Junie, but I feel like she still would have found something to like harp on, or just something to whereas poor Danny, like also wanting his parents' approval, doing all this to have all of that, like they fly back, you know, and they just, you see the disappointment, and I was just crushed for him. I was like, damn. I was like, that hurts, because
Yeah.
I think that's all he was really searching for this entire time was, just the approval of his family,
Yep. Yep.
and to have all of that just kind of burn up
Literally
in a sense.
burn. Yeah.
It really, like, I mean, damn, that hit deep.
It
Because
did,
I
man.
mean, I can think about, I'm like, me and my siblings, we're all like, well,
Mhm.
we hope, like, our parents one day say they're proud of us.
Right.
And, we work so hard to do that. And it's interesting
Mhm.
where I look how all three of us have different career paths and all
Mhm.
that. And, and same thing with our education. And I was just like, man, I was like, I felt that. And
Mm.
I did. And that point, I was like, I feel for you, because he's still, again, at times he was willing to forego and just say, you know what? I'm going to go on the straight and narrow.
Yeah. They
Whereas
kept
I
him
don't
pulled
think
back in. You think
Amy
Amy
was just
just would have
like,
kept, yeah.
oh, guess what? I don't have to worry about this, because I was just, she was a whole nother level.
She was. I'm torn between who I felt bad for the most. I think, to your point, the whole season and the whole series has been building up for Danny to build this house for all to come crashing down. But I mean, one would say it's karma. Of course, it
Oh,
would be his fault on
totally.
burning up that, he kind of cuts corners on a lot of things. I even think about early on in the season when he was cutting that neighbor's trees. He was doing, like, it was a very shoestring budget. It wasn't safe. He was just, cutting corners. It was a lot of things that Danny did throughout this series. So it did, I don't want to say poetic justice that it would be his fault that the house burned down, but of course you still feel bad for him. And on the reverse of that, at the end of the day, it was Amy's fault. No one told you to sleep with Paul. That's why you lost your
Hmm.
family, because you were out there seeking, sexual to fill that need or
Yeah.
whatever. So it is, at the end of the day, it's both of their faults. It wasn't Amy's fault that the house blew up. It was totally Danny, and it wasn't. Well, now I want to say, because if Danny didn't get into the car accident, she would have never met Paul, and maybe she would have never. I think inevitably, I think she would have cheated on George. So whether it was
At a
another
certain point,
character
I
at a
think
certain point,
so.
yeah, because she was just seeking for some type of satisfaction, at least sexually, at that point. But at the end of the day, it's still both of their faults. So, man, who would I go? I think I
Yeah,
feel bad for Danny, because that house was that sucks, man. And then
that
plus
way.
too, he's not all that money wasted because he can't file insurance because it was his fault.
And that too, like that, like I was like, oh my God. Because when the guy's like, well, if it's arson, and
Right.
so that plants the seeds and he thinks it's arson, and then he finds out, no, you
Faulty
effed it
wiring.
up yourself. I'm like,
Yep. Yep.
oh, it's like, ah.
It was rough, man. But anyway, guys, we're gonna wrap this up here with these last two episodes. I always love talking to you, Taka, because we could talk for hours, man. So if you guys have been enjoying the conversation, make sure to like, share, comment, subscribe, not only to the channel, but to my special guest, Yutaka's channel, whose information can be found in the link of this video. Episode 9 brings everything home before we get to the finale. Isaac's out of jail because Amy has told everyone the truth. She told George, the police, Naomi. She's telling Jordan about everything. Meanwhile, Danny, after getting into this kind of situation with George by hitting his head, poor Junie, which again I talked about earlier, how things are set up. When he first met Junie as Zane, he gave her the Skittles, and hey, if you ever need Skittles for me, they're always in my truck. So in episode 8 is when she goes in the truck. They think he kidnapped her. He takes her to the apartment. He wants to pack his bags to go to Mexico. Isaac shows up, pissed as hell. Now he's getting involved. He's now doing this ransom of $500,000 to get Junie back. George is obviously just listening to the police, doing whatever it takes to get his daughter back, while Amy's being a little bit more strategic. Like, no, George, we need to listen to what these, who she thinks are bad people with Isaac and stuff like that. She comes up with the plan to send them to Jordan's house to rob her because she has all this stuff, the crowns and all that. And it all comes to shit again. Paul and Danny are kept or kidnapped by them. They're held in the back of the car. They eventually get out and attack Bobby, I think was his name. Meanwhile, Isaac has them under ransom. We already talked about how Jordan dies. the police are there. And I think this is when you were talking about earlier, when the show just kind of like, oh, I didn't know it was gonna go like this with the shootout, the death. What do you think
Yeah.
about this 9th episode? And again, we thought that Paul might have died. Danny ends up escaping. I do not know how Isaac managed to survive that shootout without any bullets, or he's a lucky guy, I guess, even though he's gonna be in jail for probably a very long time.
Oh, that's right. Isaac did live. I don't
Episode
know.
9.
I will have to say though, I do want to call out the part where they're trying on all the crowns. I was I was in fits because that was the funniest. I was like, if that is not white privilege right there, just not a care. I'm like, oh, so, but it cracked me up on that, and I the fact though that the show went so hard though, and then of course the fact that then they get in a road rage and like, oh
Oh,
my
by the end of the
gosh.
episode, I mean, yeah, it
Like
had to
I
come.
did
The
like how that
whole roads
circled
lead to
around
this.
to
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
but I was just like, I
I
did
will say it
not
was
see
pretty
this ending
stupid of
there.
Danny. I don't know why he stopped to look at her, because that was so weird when he took the Hummer and he's like, I don't know if he thought that maybe he was going to help someone out on the side of the road, because he is a they're I don't want to say they're good people because they are terrible people. They have good intentions, but they just make terrible decisions. But so I don't know if he was pulling over to see if he can maybe help someone, but he pulls
He
over
seems like he'd be the type of person to
to
do
do
that
that.
though.
Yeah, because he did take at the end of the day with the whole Junie in the back car. He wanted to make sure she was safe and all that stuff. So again, I hate to say the word good people because they just make. I guess you can still be a good person and make terrible decisions.
Oh
Because
yeah.
I consider myself a good person, but I make some bad decisions sometimes, not to the extent of these characters. But I guess we can summarize them to good people, terrible decisions. But yeah, they end the episode of them crashing on the road, and I guess we can kind of talk about the ending and how you interpret the ending.